So we're going to kick off with this second panel on protecting our economy in the 2040s, securing critical maritime infrastructure. I hope you can all hear me all right. So this panel will explore how different the maritime economy will look by the 2040s, and I hope that you'll all think that in typical maritime fashion, we're doing some good horizon scanning for you here. So we're going to look at how the international maritime norms will have changed by 2040, what Britain can do to react to potential problems, and how we might be able to get ahead of them. The continuous delivery of basic services like energy, communications, the internet, depends on subsea infrastructure. And I think in the last 5 years, we've really realized that we need to understand that more. And that question about responsibility for protecting them and regulating them has become to the fore in terms of we don't really know the answers to some of those. Technology, of course, is driving the change. Remotely operated devices are developing in ways that mean our adversaries can now use them against us and capitalize on our vulnerabilities. Seabed warfare has become a real thing. And since the majority of maritime infrastructure is controlled or operated by third parties or private entities, this makes threat detection, protection, and regulation of these vital networks really complicated. And that's on top of all the other issues about climate change and food supply and the movement of goods. So it's become really clear that we need additional effort, investment, and coordination urgently. And I'm delighted to say that this panel has the answers. Don't want to overpromise, but I'm feeling confident. So our speakers today are Admiral Nicolas Vaujour, who is Chief of the Naval Staff for the French Navy, Professor Dr. Christian Bueger, who is Professor of International Relations at the University of Copenhagen, and Harry Holt, who is Chief Executive Nuclear at Babcock. And we're going to speak for, I'm going to ask each of them a couple of questions, and then hopefully we'll have about half an hour left for you guys to answer questions as well. And those people watching on the internet, I do have a little machine that you can send your questions to me, but they come in very small letters, so I probably won't be able to read them, so make them very short and clear. So, Admiral, we're going to start with you. You command a navy that operates at sea every day. What are the current threats to maritime critical infrastructure that you perceive, and how do you see that situation developing, and what are then going to be the consequences of that for its protection to 2040? That's a lot.
Thank you very much. Ben, thank you also for giving me the opportunity to be here today as a good partners. Just coming back 400 years back, we will celebrate the 400 years of the French Navy in 2026. The French Navy was created by a French king. Yes, at that time there was one, Louis XIII. And we built the French Navy first to protect the trade at the origin in 1626. What is quite interesting right now is that we are at the beginning probably of a new cycle. We're coming back to our roots, which is protecting trade. This is the my first thinking about that. When you look at what will stay like this today, what remains unchanged in the maritime security, the sea, the maritime space, is a place of flow, and I think it will remain like this in the years to come. The sea is a place of resources, and the exploitation of that resources will increase, definitely. And it means that we will have more fishery, we will have more oil and gas industry, and we will have more and more mineral resource exploitation in the future. And the sea is also a place of sovereignty. It means that the fight at sea, which was something we used to have with the Royal Navy for years, but now we are very close friends. Sometimes we win, sometimes they win. I don't know where is the balance, but that's it. We are also a global nuclear navy every day, every ocean at sea, of course. But the conclusion of that is sea and critical infrastructures remain something critical and something which could take into account inside all the conflict in the world now. What we see today is that all the conflict are spilling over at sea. I mean, Ukraine is spilling over in the Black Sea, and there is food consequences, food flow consequences. Spilling over in the Baltic Sea with the Nord Stream issue, and spilling over also with Israel-Gaza conflict in the Red Sea with a major issue on the maritime flow there. So when you are a competitor, it's really useful to have a tool in your hand to make some pressure on your competitor using sea and especially critical infrastructure underwater to put some pressure on your competitor. It's very easy because it's the place of the hybrid warfare. And so what we are seeing is that everything will become more and more complex. And so if we have to go in 2040, yeah, it is possible. I think there is some major criteria. The first one, the climate change will increase the problem. I mean, all the critical infrastructure at sea are fragile when you think about storms, rough seas, and so on. And so it means that we, industry, we navies, must improve the way we use that kind of infrastructures in order to protect them, to use them good. So climate change will increase the problem and will probably also increase the tension between countries. The use of the sea will increase also food security. When you are thinking that the place of food exploitation ashore will diminish with the climate change, it means that at the same time you will have to find more protein at sea for a population in a global warming context. It means that illegal fishing will be more and more under tension, and so we will have to deal with that. But one thing also where we will have to deal is lawfare. I mean, when we think about the international rule-based order, do we think that in the 2040 perspective, sorry, je vais le faire en français? Non, je ne fais pas en français. Donc, okay. It will remain the same. I mean, do you think that we have to keep on with the international rule-based order like it is, with UNCLOS, or do we have to make something altogether to reinforce our common good, which is the UNCLOS coming from 1982? When we think about offshore perspective outside territorial waters, everything is not exactly written on the paper. BBNG is offering some new perspective, but we see that some competitors are fighting against UNCLOS. How can we react all together to make it better, to make it stronger in the 2040 perspective? We have a lot to do, I think so, if we want to protect that, because I'm not sure that the world as it is going now is going in the good way. So, France built for protecting critical infrastructure underwater a French strategy in order to see what's going on there. I heard Bernd speaking about that. We do not know the seabed at that time very well. We better know the moon, but not the seabed. And so we have to explore, we have to monitor, we have to see what our competitors are able to do, and we have to be able to detect any bad signals and to intervene. Of course, we are not able to do that alone. We have to do that with the industry, and so that's what we are building right now, buying some capabilities, some assets, working with the industry, and working also with partners and allies, because for me, of course, wider spectrum of threat, meaning that more assets. And I am not as lucky as Ben here today. I am not at 2.5 of the GDP right now. I will be back in France, try to convince my Minister of Defense to do the same. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure he can give you some tips how to produce a persuasive risk-based request. Just a follow-up one from me about collaboration and cooperation. So how do you and the French Navy develop your means of working alongside partners and other actors in the maritime world to meet the challenges?
Thank you for the question. When you think about what is a naval power right now, we used to say that it is the number of assets you have, the technology you have, and the skills of your crews. But I think definitely that to make the good picture of a naval power is to add a fourth one, which is partnership. If you have only the three first pillars without partners, you are still alone, and you are not developing your skills, you are not developing your capabilities to answer the question. Having partners giving you access everywhere in the world where your partner is, give you an opportunity to well understand what's going on, because other partners have other way of thinking. French and UK often exchanges because we definitely do not have the same way of thinking. But that's very good. And the third thing is that partnership will give you the ability to stay for a long time in the crisis zone. It means that when there is another asset from your partner, you are not, it is not mandatory to stay there. So you can be better in the world. So it's very important for me. It means that interoperability, we spoke about that this morning, is key, and interoperability is connectivity, procedures, but also trust. And building trust is probably something which is key, and I'm very happy to have my partners here at the first rank, and we are very close partners, and we speak all together very oftenly. But I am not that optimistic about interoperability in the future. New technology like artificial intelligence will provoke some rupture in terms of using our assets. And the question of interoperability with that kind of technological rupture is a real issue, a big challenge for all of us. And if we go in different way, we will have difficulty to come back and guarantee our interoperability. So we have a lot of work to do. That's good. I am not unemployed.
So that's an important warning from us there, that we have to, if we're going to do this, we have to do it right. Christian, you've given, I think, a really good definition of what the maritime domain, the sort of subsea elements are, and I think it'd be really helpful to hear from you on that. And also then this question about the oceans, this sort of densely populated infrastructure now down there under the sea. And what do you think are the key dependencies that we've got?
Thank you so much for the question, and it's a pleasure to be here today and think about these questions of how 2040 and perhaps the years ahead are going to look like. 2040 is not that far away. We are almost already living in 2040. Let's not forget that. I think the major point here is that we have to start recognizing that we are living in an age of infrastructure. And we are just kind of like waking up to that. And that basically implies that the oceans are not what they used to be. The oceans today are heavily industrialized zones, and we can see this in particular in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, but increasingly also in the Mediterranean and other parts of the oceans. And because of this industrialization of the oceans, our dependency on the sea is vastly increasing. Energy, our energy futures, green energy transition is almost dependent, or exclusively dependent on the sea. The internet, transport, quite obviously, but we also need the oceans as a carbon sink and as a site for carbon storage. So all of that is absolutely vital in the response to climate change. What does this new dependency on the sea imply? It implies that freedom of navigation is no longer our main problem. Our main problem today is how to care, protect, maintain, and repair infrastructures. So that is the new agenda, and that is the future for navies, but also other maritime security forces. One of the implications of that is that we need to start thinking much more about the interdependency of different kinds of infrastructures. And one step into that direction is, first of all, to recognize that so far, pretty much all of maritime security, with the exception of submarine warfare, is concerned about the surface. If you look at multinational missions these days, they're all concerned about threats against shipping. The sea today, however, is a multidimensional space. And the sea is connected to airspace. The sea is connected to the lower orbit. Satellites are becoming more and more important for sensing, for navigation, and so on. The sea is connected to the subsea. The sea is connected to the seabed, where all these important infrastructures actually lie, whether it's the internet cable, the electricity cables, or the side of where the platforms are. And last but not least, the sea is also increasingly entangled with the cyberspace, right? So actually, maritime security today is concerned about 6 dimensions. And we have to start recognizing all 6 of these dimensions and how they interplay with each other. Looking at the surface in its own right will not do the trick. So this is kind of like the main strategic challenge I see today, how to care, protect, and maintain infrastructures and pay attention to the 6 dimensions of the sea today.
Thank you, Christian. And then, so it would be really helpful if you could explain a little bit more about which areas of critical maritime infrastructure you think are particularly vulnerable to disruption, and what levels of disruption you think might occur in the near future.
Absolutely. When I'm talking about the interdependency of infrastructures, it's useful to look at a couple of cases. And I think a particular interesting case is the sinking of the Ruby Mar in the Red Sea just a couple of weeks back, the first ship that actually sunk because of Houthi strikes. But importantly, while drifting, the Ruby Mar also damaged 4 subsea data cables. Right? And that clearly shows us how interwoven different infrastructures are today, because the Red Sea is not only a choke point for shipping, it is also a major choke point for the super data highway that connects Europe and Asia. So the 4 cables that were actually cut, we didn't feel it here in Europe, but across Asia it was actually being felt in terms of the internet speed. So we have to start thinking more and more with cases such as the Ruby Mar, and feature in different kinds of choke points, not only shipping choke points, but also data choke points. And then last but not least, think across these 6 domains. How might a future attack actually look like? It might very well begin with a cyber attack on a satellite that has an impact on navigation, lead to a shipping disaster that has environmental impact, closes down a shipping route, and is combined with an attack on subsea data cables. So these scenarios we actually have to start looking at, which starts out from the interdependencies of these infrastructures. What is important about this here is also quite obviously, navies cannot do that on their own. Right? It is not exclusively or primarily a military task to protect and care infrastructures. Deterrence is extremely important in this. Surveillance is extremely important in this. But it also requires a civilian component. The civilian maritime security forces, radically differently organized across countries. But it also requires a close cooperation with the maritime industries. And quite obviously here we are also talking about industries in the plural, not only shipping, but also energy companies, wind farm developers, carbon storage, and last but not least, also the global internet industry. So getting these corporations across countries with a focus on regional seas such as the North Sea, the Mediterranean, or the Baltic Sea, right, that will be one of the core challenges for the next 16 years, so to say.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a tall order, actually, but one that we can meet. Harry Holt, you're our industry representative. There's been a lot of talk in recent weeks about the need to put the defence industrial base on a war footing, and you might think that's possibly an exaggeration, but how can or how will industry meet the challenge of intensifying competition at sea, and particularly the need to help nations such as the UK, such as France, protect their critical maritime infrastructure?
Thank you, Suzanne. I don't think it's an exaggeration, but I do prefer the expression pre-war rather than war footing, because the whole point about preparing for war is you're doing so in the hope that you can avoid it through deterrence. We all understand the importance of sea lines of communication. That's probably why we're all here, as the key enabler for the free passage of trade and goods, as the lifeblood for the global economy, but also it enables our ability to project power and then to sustain and to supply that power in the context of any future global conflict. And as we heard from Christian, the importance of the maritime environment has only increased over the last several decades via things like subsea communications infrastructure, access to natural resources, and the major energy transit routes that now operate in the maritime environment. So given it's more important, it's not any surprise that it's more contested, and the question really is, what can industry do to increase and enhance defence maritime capability? I'm from Babcock, so you're going to get a Babcock slant to this answer. And Babcock does through-life engineering support to defence assets, and in the context of this conversation, it does it for defence maritime assets, whether that be surface warships or, in my part of the business, for the nuclear-powered submarine force. So that means that we're involved in design, build, operate and maintain, and then finally decommission, dismantle and dispose. And it's important to see this across the whole life cycle. And without wishing to grossly oversimplify, what we need to do is to increase the capacity and reduce the timeline taken in the design and build phases in order to increase the number of defence maritime assets, and at the same time improve our maintenance capability to drive greater availability of the assets that we currently have. Easy to say, more difficult to do. But I think any solution has 5 key themes. And the first theme is a behavioural one, which I know has come up lots of times already in this conference. It's around collaboration. Putting ourselves on a pre-war footing provides a rallying cry. It aligns people. It gives us a singularity of focus. And that is super helpful to drive the levels of collaboration that are required between industry and our customer. And there's lots of great examples that I could cite about that collaboration already working in practice between Babcock, the other industrial parties, and the MOD and Navy Command. But we also need collaboration within the industry itself between the primes and their supply chain partners. And importantly, we need collaboration internationally if we're to realize some of our wider strategic initiatives such as AUKUS. So collaboration is the first theme. The second theme is infrastructure. So I'm talking dry docks, non-tidal basins, floating jetties, derricks, cranes, factories, all of the wherewithal that you need not only to build maritime capability, but also importantly to sustain it. And the simple answer is we don't yet have enough. Third theme is digital. We are not yet as good as we should be at collating, storing, mining, analyzing all of the digital data with a view to using that to get insights on how to improve our planning and our maintenance activity to drive up availability. So digital is a big theme. Technology, theme number 4, and by technology I'm really focusing in on manufacturing and repair technology, where there is scope with the right innovation to take a significant amount of time out of reasonably routine tasks, and importantly, to improve the quality of work, which might almost eradicate the requirement for rework. And obviously, autonomy and AI are part of that overall technology theme. And then last, but by no means least, probably the most important and often overlooked, people and skills. So if we haven't got the right workforce with the right skills, with the right demographics, then we're dead in the water, to pardon the pun. And a lot of work is required to make sure that we've got the right industrial workforce to deliver on our ambitions. So 5 themes, but simply put, what we need to do is to increase the capacity and reduce the timelines of the maritime defence asset lifecycle.
Thank you, Harry. And just a very quick follow-up question about building that new enabling infrastructure. What do you think is necessary to do in order to make that happen?
So the thing with those themes that I mentioned is some of them you can turn on and off fairly quickly, like collaboration. You can decide to collaborate, you can decide not to collaborate. Others, particularly infrastructure and people and skills, take years, arguably even decades, to make a substantive difference to the status quo. So we need to get on those 2 themes, PDQ. We need to speed up decision-making. We need to encourage and accelerate capital investment. And it's important to understand that you can't look at infrastructure and you can't look at skills in isolation. With skills in particular, nuclear skills particularly, we're in a competitive market and there are other sectors that are fishing in the same pool. So it's no good just diverting resource from sector A to sector B. You need to look strategically about how you grow the resource pool overall. And that is, as many people in the room know, the genesis of the Nuclear Skills Task Force, with its ambition to bring 135,000 new people into the nuclear sector by 2030, and a similar level of ambition beyond that out to 2040. And in fact, you can't even just look at this nationally. You have to look at it internationally, because there are other parts of the world, the Middle East, for example, or Australia, that are, again, fishing in the same pool of global skills. So anything that you do needs to be coordinated, not only nationally and internationally. And the final thing I would say, which is just a point of emphasis, history tells us that we are pretty good at allocating funding for upfront capability acquisition, and we're not so good at allocating the necessary funding to sustain that capability. And as a rule of thumb, when you look at the whole life cost of any asset, about 25% of it is on the design and build, and 75% of it is on the remainder of the life cycle. So of course we need to do both. But as we're focused on new capability acquisition, I'd encourage us not to forget about some of the other investments that are required to sustain that capability through life.
Thank you very much to our 3 panelists.